All right, let's jump right in. We're going to tackle a really interesting take on AI today. You've heard the term AI bias a million times, right? But what if that's not even the right way to think about it? What if AI is just a mirror and the reflection we're seeing is telling us a whole lot more about us than it is about the machine? So this really gets to the heart of the matter. The latest research is showing that these AI models, they aren't neutral, not at all. They reflect a really, really specific worldview. So the big question is, when we hold up this AI mirror, who or what is actually staring back at us? Okay, so let's get into our first section here, the AI in the mirror. The first instinct for a lot of people when they see this reflection is to just slap a label on it, bias. But what if that simple label is actually hiding something? Something much, much deeper about civilization itself. So this whole conversation really kicked off with a big study from Harvard. Researchers decided to map out the worldviews of the big AI models. And what they found was, well, it wasn't neutrality. Far from it. In fact, all the models were huddled together, tightly clustered around this one specific perspective, a Western individualist one. Which brings us to diagnosing the bias. Now, the immediate reaction from almost everyone was, okay, the AI is biased, that's a problem, and we need to fix it. But the argument we're digging into today says, hold on, that diagnosis might be completely wrong. Let's get into why. So the standard critique, the one you hear all the time, goes something like this, right? The AI has a bias. That bias reinforces a dominant culture. It basically treats one way of thinking as the normal or correct way, and in doing so, it pushes everything else to the margins, turning it into the other. And this critique often pulls in research that uses this really memorable acronym, WEIRD. It stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. And the whole point of this research is to show that this weird perspective, it's not the global default, not even close. If you look at the whole span of human history and culture, it's actually a major outlier. Okay, so what this boils down to is a really simple, almost knee-jerk line of reasoning. Step 1, the Western worldview is dominant. Step 2, being dominant is a problem. Step 3, therefore, the AI is a problem. See how that works? It's a very straightforward A to B to C logic. But this is where our source material takes a pretty sharp turn. It calls this whole line of thinking an inverted catechism. Now, a catechism, is basically a script of questions and answers for religious instruction. So the idea here is that discovering this bias, it's not a discovery at all. It's just reading the answer that was already written into the script. The conclusion was there before the research even started. It's less of a scientific finding and more like a ritual. Okay, so what if the problem isn't just about this cultural critique? The argument we're exploring says the rabbit hole goes way deeper. It goes right to the core of how we even think about and measure intelligence. And that brings us to the limits of IQ. Think about it. We have this tendency, right? We see intelligence as this simple, straight line. Someone with an IQ of 150 is just more smart than someone with an IQ of 100. So naturally, a super intelligent AI must have what, an IQ of 1,000, a million? Well, the argument here is that this entire way of thinking isn't just wrong, it's actually dangerous. And this is such a key distinction. An AI can get a really high IQ score. What does that mean? It means it's incredible at spotting patterns. It can simulate reasoning. It's a master at filling in the blanks. But, and this is a huge but, that is not the same thing as understanding truth. It doesn't mean it has wisdom, and it definitely doesn't mean it has any kind of moral grounding. And that leads to this. This is the absolute core of the danger. The source puts it so well. A superhuman IQ without alignment to truth is not a genius. It is a chaos amplifier. Think about that. Not a genius, a chaos amplifier. Something that can produce incredibly sophisticated, totally convincing mistakes at a scale we can barely even imagine. So, if what we're seeing in AI isn't just a simple bias, then what in the world is it? Well, this is where the source introduces a really cool, powerful new idea. Let's think about it as civilizational physics. Here's the basic idea. What we're seeing in our AI, it isn't some bug that we need to patch. It's an inheritance. It's a feature, not a bug. The idea is that every single civilization writes its deepest code, its logic, its ethics, its whole way of seeing reality into its language, its stories, its tools. So an AI that's trained on all that data, It's not just learning words, it's inheriting the entire blueprint of that civilization. And to make this less abstract, just look at this comparison. On one side, you have what's labeled Western symbolic logic, the yang. It's all about non-contradiction, breaking things down into their smallest parts, being reductionist. On the other side, you have Eastern traditions, the yin. And that's often about complementarity, how opposites can exist together, unity, the whole. It's pretty clear that an AI trained mostly on text from that yang column is going to end up thinking in that yang kind of way. Now, the point here is absolutely not to say one side is better than the other. No way. The real insight, the argument goes, is that wisdom, the thing we actually want, doesn't live on either side of the coin. It lives on the edge, that tiny space where these two seemingly opposite ways of thinking meet and integrate. So, if we reframe the problem like this, it naturally leads to a solution, and this is a constructive one. We need a whole new model for what intelligence even means. So let's talk about this proposed model. It's called the HG Framework, which stands for Hybrid General Intelligence. And the whole point is to stop thinking about intelligence as just raw brute force cognitive power. Instead, let's redefine it as something much more holistic, something integrated. So if you look at how this HG model breaks down, you can see cognitive IQ, it's just one slice of the pie, and it's not even the biggest slice. The largest piece of the puzzle here is something called the wisdom quotient, or WQ. That's all about judgment, ethics, the big picture. And then you've got other crucial parts, like emotional intelligence, temperament, and the ability to reason across different domains. And here's a great way to think about the difference between IQ and WQ. IQ, that's just an amplifier. It takes whatever you already want to do and makes you better at it. But WQ, that's what shapes what you want to do in the first place. Put it another way, IQ helps you win the argument. WQ helps you see that you're in the wrong argument and you need to change the whole conversation. And this all circles back to that critical idea of truth, which the source calls logos, in the sense of a deeper, underlying order to reality. A sky-high IQ that isn't grounded in that logos doesn't create genius. It creates what's called clever error. Incredibly sophisticated, totally convincing lies. It's only when you combine that high IQ with logos that you start to get coherent, trustworthy truth. Okay, so all of this, it's all been building toward a final and pretty radical conclusion about what might be the single biggest challenge in AI right now, the alignment problem. And here it is, the big takeaway. All this frantic energy we're pouring into aligning AI with human values, it's pointing the wrong way. The source argues that the alignment problem isn't really a technical problem. It's not a coding problem. It's a human problem. Because before we have any hope of aligning our machines, we have to figure out how to align ourselves. And that brings us right back to where we started, but with a much bigger question. The AI is a mirror. If we look in it and we don't like what we see, well, tweaking the mirror's code isn't going to fix the reflection. The real challenge, the one that's staring right back at us, is to look at ourselves and ask the hard questions. What needs to change in us? What would it take for us to create a reflection worth building in the first place?